Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I'm covering the newest machine of war in this video, the Dark Angel's Stormspeeder, also known as the Ravenwing Strike Craft. It's a pretty simple machine of war, so this video accordingly should be a shorter video. If you're here for a 15-second summary, the Stormspeeder's primary ability deals damage to an enemy and buffs the next Dark Angel's attack against the target. The secondary effectively gives a unit some more damage when it makes a ranged attack, but there are a couple of layers to it. The Mythic ability lets characters take less damage from ranged attacks in certain circumstances. On the Machine of War screen, the Stormspeeder looks awesome. Snowprint's art department, as usual, have done a great job with the model and animations. The primary ability is called Death on the Wind. It targets an enemy that was already attacked this turn and deals heavy round damage to units in a line, starting with the targeted enemy. All affected enemies then take bonus damage from the next attack from a friendly Dark Angel this turn. The ability costs 1 munition and starts on a 1-turn cooldown. The secondary ability is called Hail Strike. It targets a friendly unit on the battlefield and provides it with bonus pierce ratio with ranged and overwatch attacks. Pierce ratio usually equates to bonus damage, but you need to remember how damage is calculated and the Damvar equation. The Mythic ability is a damage reduction one, which to me is slightly less appealing than the Mythic abilities that buff damage. Units take less range damage if they have moved at least 2 hexes or are adjacent to a Dark Angel's unit. The fact that the damage reduction does not apply to melee attacks makes it less attractive. The abilities are simple enough, but let's look at some gameplay clips before diving into the numbers. We'll start with the primary. First, we have a mouse over damage preview from Sarquael that shows 615 damage. Remember that we can't use the primary unless someone has already attacked the target, so we have this grot to help us out. Now we use the primary ability and can see that units in a line are hit by the Stormspeeder's heavy round damage. All of the affected units have a debuff icon next to their profile that shows they will receive extra damage this turn. When we go back to Sarquael, the damage preview has increased to 831, reflecting the percentage damage boost from the Machine of War's primary ability. For the secondary, we'll again use Sarquael as an example. We have the damage preview as shown here. Then we apply the secondary, and Sarquael gets the appropriate buff icon under his character portrait. Now the damage preview has increased, and when Sarquael attacks, it triggers some bonus damage from the Machine of War. I'll briefly show you the Mythic ability in effect. It asks our units to move 2 hexes to gain the damage reduction buff, which I think is a nod to the mobile aspects of the Ravenwing. The obvious bit of interest around this Machine of War relates to Forcas. Forcas had a brief stint in the sun before Carrion was unveiled and usurped him in the meta. I wondered if the bonus percentage damage from this machine could make up some of the ground for the Dark Angels variant of the multi-hit team against Chaos bosses like Magnus. What I found was that the bonus damage was nice, but not too impressive, especially in the context of other machines of war providing 20% damage boosts at max settings. There is obviously an argument to be made that comparing machines of war with mythic abilities is something that is not relevant for most players. The other thing about this Machine of War is that I found missing the Spore Mines against Magnus was a huge loss due to the movement and battlefield manipulation that they provided. In those fights against Magnus, I found myself missing the Spore Mines a lot due to their movement and battlefield manipulation, something that the Stormspeeder just doesn't provide. The current argument for bringing the Dark Angels against Magnus is that the team front-loads a lot of its damage with a double Warhowl turn, and then you don't have to worry about complicated turn sequencing where the boss is constantly moving around the map and cloning your units. If you are a skilled player and can cope with those elements of randomness, then I think the Custodes team does better versus Magnus. On the left, I'm showing you a replay with the Dark Angels multi-hit team with the Stormspeeder, and on the right is the same team with the Rucka Truck. Both are against a Mythic 1 Magnus, and Forcas has his new relic equipped. I'll let the replays run through on screen for a while, but you'll see that we do the bulk of our damage on the early turns, and actually from a pure damage point of view, the Rucka Truck outperforms the speeder by a big margin. I know that this is at max settings, and mythic abilities won't matter for a lot of people. I'm providing these replays as a framework to suggest that the Stormspeeder isn't going to be a top-tier raid machine of war. It might, however, be serviceable as a budget option for players that love to use Forcas or the Dark Angels. Next, Incursion. For the Stormspeeder machine, we use Chaos characters, and as you would expect, we fight against Dark Angel's enemies. On the topic of enemies, there are 3 new NPCs created for the Dark Angel Incursion. The Dark Angels get an Infiltrator, which has Overwatch and Infiltrate. No special abilities, and it does the ranged attack at range 2. The Hellblaster is another ranged unit. This one has a range 3 plasma attack and the heavy weapon and final vengeance traits. Finally, we have the Deathwing Knight. Big target, deep strike, and Terminator along with a power melee attack. It has the Deathwing passive ability, which is basically the same as Barakiel's passive. Now, there hasn't been anything confirmed by Snowprint, obviously, but I wonder if this means we will see more Dark Angels content soon. In the past, new NPCs that have been introduced via Incursion have laid the foundation for things like campaign events and boss fights, thinking about the Tau and Admech as recent examples. It kind of makes sense when you think about it. Snowprint have already spent the time on unit design and models and animations, so they might as well get a return on investment. If you haven't yet seen my Machine of War guide for 2025, I would recommend checking it out. I've used the same assessment model for this machine. I think this machine is primarily going to be for PvP. It obviously works better alongside Dark Angels due to the synergies in the abilities. Overall though, it isn't a Machine of War that I'm super excited by, and I think I'll end up skipping this one for Incursion as I look to get more shards for other, more valuable Machines of War. Okay, that's all I've got. I hope you found it useful. A big shout out to my Patreons and YouTube members for supporting me, and bye for now.